Hello everyone, Stepan here, welcome to Hanging Pawns. I'm going to cover round 4 of the World Chess Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana, and in this game something, well, you might find interesting happened, and that's the fact that Magnus Carlsen played the English opening and Caruana went for a variation which he, well, 2 of the highest rated games in the live book in the databases are his. He played them against Aronian and against Anand, and he lost them both. And he went into the same line nevertheless. And now Magnus Carlsen must have been prepared for what Caruana played against those two, and perhaps he was even expecting that. And Caruana did manage to find, well, an improvement, but nothing major, I think. And I'm not sure why he went for this line, and perhaps he should try and prepare something different against c4. So after 3 consecutive draws in the first 3 games, as you may know, Magnus Carlsen almost won game 1. He should have converted, but he didn't. And 2 peaceful draws in games 2 and 3. They were playing round 4. Magnus opened with pawn to c4 the English, and we have e5, the most common reply by Fabiano Caruana. Knight to c3, knight to f6, the king's English variation, the 2 knights variation, knight to f3, knight to c6, and this is now the 4 knights. And this is a variation of the English opening which is very popular at the highest levels, and it has been played by most of the top GMs recently, and in the candidates tournament played earlier this year, this opening was employed by many players, especially by Aronian, and, well, Caruana played it as well. And it's a very well-known line. There's been a lot of games played from this position on g3 by Magnus Carlsen. Those are all the main moves, just the basic mainline theory. d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop to g2, and bishop to c5. Now this move is uncommon by Fabiano Caruana, but as I said, this exact line has been played by him 2 times already, and he lost both games against Vishy Anand and Aronian. And what I found surprising was that he chose bishop to c5. The most common move after bishop to g2, the main line of the 4 knights English, is knight to b6, and then after castles, bishop to e7, d3, castles, bishop e3, bishop e6, rook to c1. This is what you would normally get, and black is considered to have a slight edge in this position. The position is equal, but the fact that black managed to equalize on move 10 is, well, I think okay for black, and I would always go for this line. The move he chose, bishop to c5, is, well, it gives white a slight opening edge plus 0.2, so nothing major, and it's much more aggressive, of course, than knight to b6. Now, this move is accepting, giving white the possibility to capture on d5, and once the queen recaptures, then the knight would have some discoveries, but none of them would be too useful, so that's not really a major tactical threat. And the other thing is that the bishop is now developed on this very dangerous diagonal. Now if you know any positions in the Italian for white or something like that, then bishops staring at f2 and at f7 are probably the best placed bishops on the board, so this is a very sensible square. Okay, in this position Magnus continues with castles, Caruana castles as well, and we have d3, a normal move developing the bishop. This is a very normal maneuver in the English opening, and white will usually play that sooner or later. Rook to e8, bishop to d2, developing the bishop. Now that is the only square, I guess. White could try playing queen to c2 and then playing b3, bishop b2, but I think that's too much of a waste of time. In this position Caruana captures, knight takes c3, bishop takes c3, and knight to d4, inserting the knight into the center. Taking the knight would, well, probably result in an exchange, but the fact is that whichever exchanges happen, this pawn is going to end up on d4, and I think this pawn in conjunction with the move c5 would restrain white's position quite a bit, and this pawn would be problematic for white to handle. Now on the other hand, this bishop would be immediately open, so I'm not sure. If I was Magnus Carlsen here, I would definitely consider capturing, but he didn't, so let's say this happens, bishop takes, pawn takes. I'm not sure whether this pawn is a liability or a strength. Now black would definitely have to play rook to b8 and then play c5, perhaps bishop to d7, bishop c6 to exchange the bishops, but I think this pawn would be very useful as well. Anyway, after knight to d4, Magnus Carlsen played a more aggressive move. He played b4, chasing the bishop away. And Fabiano continued with bishop to d6, retreating the bishop, and now rook to b1. And in this position, Caruana decided to capture the knight on f3, which I... Well, in this position, of course, the knight is attacked twice and only defended once, so if black doesn't do anything, white will win a pawn on d4, so knight takes d4, pawn takes d4, bishop takes d4 would win a pawn. And, well, black could perhaps take on g3, but then white would take on g7, and after bishop to h2 check, king takes h2, then the king would recapture here, and I'm not sure who would be better, but I guess Fabiano didn't want to go for that. He captured on f3, so knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, of course, taking with the e pawn would be absurd, you would weaken your d3 pawn, and now a6, and this move is stopping, stopping b5, and it's also preparing perhaps to stop another pawn advance white might have considered on the queen side. And Magnus does continue immediately. He plays pawn to a4 aggressively, and we have c6, and now once again putting another defender to stop b5. Rook to e1, bringing his last piece into the game. Morphy style, and now all of Magnus Carlsen's pieces are playing, and those are perhaps the best squares for them. Another plan he might have considered, which I thought was fun during the game, instead of rook to e1, was to play queen to d2, and now, let's say, black develops to play rook to c1, and I think the rooks would have been more powerful on these two lines. But after rook to e1, we have bishop to d7, e3, now preparing, firstly stopping the move e4, and perhaps even preparing the move d4 in some positions. Queen to f6, now indirectly threatening both bishops, of course. Now the move e4 would win a piece if Magnus Carlsen doesn't react. So we have bishop to e4, stopping that, bishop f5, challenging the bishop, queen to f3, bishop takes e4, queen takes f6, g takes f6, d takes e4, and unfortunately they've traded queens and they've traded a pair of bishops. Now to whose advantage it's, well, it could be debated, I guess. I would rather have white's pawn structure because the doubled e-pawns do serve a purpose in the center, and they block out the bishop on d6, but on the other hand, they also, this pawn structure also blocks out Magnus's bishop on c3, so I guess it's equally inactive for both sides. And with the queens off, the position definitely got much simpler to play, and I was afraid, and I thought that the game will end in a draw, and I was unhappy to see this. Now Caruana played b5. Which is an okay move, trying to dissolve white's pawn structure on the queen side. Rook e to d1, bring the rook to the open file. Bishop f8, a takes b5, a takes b5, king to g2, trying to bring the king closer to the center and to the king side, and perhaps preparing the move f4, trying to activate the bishop. Rook e to d8, challenging the rook. Rook dc1, declining a trade because Caruana knows that Magnus Carlsen knows that Caruana can't infiltrate on d2 because the bishop is guarding that square. Now one move which Caruana could have considered in this position was rook to a3, but now simply bishop to e1 would suffice, I think, still defending the pawn twice and preventing rook to d2. So in this position, after rook dc1, we have king to g7 by Fabiano, bringing the king closer. Bishop to e1, perhaps in anticipation of rook to a3, rook dc8, and yeah, bishop to e1 was also attacking the c6 pawn, rook dc8 defending, rook to c2 preparing to attack the c6 pawn twice, rook a4, king to f3, h5 expanding on the king side, king to e2, king to g6, normal sensible moves. Well, the game is pretty much super precise by both players, same as round 3 played yesterday, and I think neither player made a mistake in the game, which is depressing for the fans, but I guess good news for both of them. So h3, f5, e takes f5, dissolving the doubled pawns for both, king takes f5, f3 stopping the king's infiltration if you allow the king into e4. If this pawn wasn't here, if it was, let's say, on b3, then black would have a significant edge, but in this position f3 solves all the issues. Bishop to e7, e4 check, chasing the king away, king e6, bishop to d2, activating the bishop, now giving it far more scope. And after bishop d6, rook b to c1. Unfortunately for us spectators, Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano agreed to a draw, and according to the engines, Fabiano has a slight edge in this position. It's minus 0.4, but nothing he could convert on, I'm sure, especially against Magnus, who is the endgame king and who could play this position super precisely. They both had enough time on the clock, neither of them was in time trouble, and, well, objectively, there's not much to play for in this position. And now if you imagined, okay, let's say the game continuing, I don't think black can capture here. I think in this position, white might be better. I'm not sure though. I guess it's still just a draw, but let's say this happens. I think black is still fine because he can chase the king around, and the king has no squares to go to. Let's say king goes here. Yeah, I mean, if the king attacks the rook, then this is just a draw, and if it doesn't, if it goes towards guarding the pawns, then black can just repeat. So I guess black isn't in trouble. So anyway, on move 34, unfortunately, it was a draw, and I guess it's a fair result. None of them made mistakes, and I hope we can get a more fun game tomorrow. After two Sicilians with black from Magnus Carlsen, I'm not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. I hope he plays something aggressive in round 5 as well, and I hope Fabiano Caruana doesn't become afraid of playing e4 against him, because in both games, both in round 1 and in round 3, he seemed to be sort of on the defensive side. Even though he had the white pieces, which would never be the case, especially for top GMs. And I hope he can find something which he feels more secure playing, and I hope one of them manages to convert. Now I keep changing sides. I keep debating with myself in my head who I'd prefer to win, whether it should be Magnus or Caruana, and I still can't decide. But for now, I'm just hoping for some more aggressive games and more games like the game in round 1, in which Magnus played super aggressively, and we actually saw some mistakes. In the last 2 rounds, they both played like engines, and I have to say it's not that fun to watch, but I guess they're just that strong. Okay, everybody, thanks very much for watching. I hope you got something from this game. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and stay tuned for more chess. See you. Bye bye.